Integrity and wholeness are two important concepts that everyone has probably heard of, but not always fully understood. How are these two concepts generally perceived? What do they have to do with each other? We decided to talk to some people from both within and outside the academic community to gain a better sense of the dynamics of integrity and wholeness.
When I think of the word integrity, I think of the analogy of a building or a structure. And a structure has integrity, meaning it has strength or it has fortitude. And in an academic setting, I think of integrity as a process, a way that students, or an attribute that students develop over time. So it isn't something that we're necessarily born with, but it is something that we might have a disposition toward, but something that we develop in an academic setting. My approach to how to deal with that with students was not so much the process of a penalty or an imposing a penalty. It was helping students to understand why we have a code of student behavior and why integrity is important. So the most important part of the whole process was the meeting that I would have with students, where we would look at the case, where we would look at the evidence, and I would ask them, what kinds of factors led to this kind of behavior? And we would talk it out. Sometimes these meetings would go on for an hour, maybe 2 hours. But by the end, when the student left, if they understood why the university has a code of student behavior and why we value academic integrity, then I think that they have gotten closer to really valuing integrity, and that has become a learning process for them. And they are on the road to really developing a sense of integrity.
It's really a matter of professionalism. I try and tell my students at the beginning of every class that they're training to be professionals. Their future colleagues will be the people sitting around them, and they want to make a good impression on them. They want to be known as someone who doesn't take shortcuts, who doesn't do anything that isn't completely reliable. And so that's a big part of integrity for me from the teaching side of things. For the research side, it all boils down to trust. So much of science is predicated on being able to trust what has come before you. And if you can't, we don't have time to reproduce every experiment. And so you have to have that element of trust. And that really requires you to look at your own work very critically and to be able to say, you know, even though this doesn't fit my model, I can't just throw it out. The most interesting thing you can ever hear a scientist say is not, oh yeah, that makes sense, but, oh, I wonder why that's the way it is. Or I wonder why. That's where you get the progress. And unless you can trust what's gone before and you can trust what you do, you can't get there.
When I think about integrity, I think about things like authenticity. I think about honesty to a certain degree. Now, in art making in general, there's always a tension around authenticity and integrity because, of course, nothing comes from nowhere. Everyone is inspired by something or someone, regardless of whether they're aware of it or willing to acknowledge it. These things really are about kind of being part of a continuum. And I think being willing to acknowledge your lineage, your heritage, your connection to other art and other art making actually becomes a real strength, but it can be hard for artists to embrace that idea of being part of a larger whole. I think sometimes we think authenticity means originality, which is a difficult word, right, in the arts. But I think, you know, artists have expressed these ideas well. I mean, Picasso, of course, saying, good artists borrow, great artists steal, is really poking at the idea of integrity. So you know, inside, whether you are simply lifting someone else's idea and without sort of reinterpreting it or re-engaging with it, representing it to others as a kind of sham, versus being really excited by something you've seen and then taking that to a new place.
We're all influenced by our environment, by other musicians, by the sounds around us. But it's taking that influence that you've had and this experience that you had in the world and making it musically making it something that's as honest to yourself. Nothing's really authentic, but again, you're bringing in all these experiences that you had in life around you from all spheres, whether it's accounting, music, art, whatever, friends, teachers. You're bringing all this in and it makes you who you are. To me, integrity and wholeness, and I think to most professionals, integrity and wholeness means more than that, more than just adherence to a professional code of conduct or professional standards. It's basically knowing who is going to be relying on your report, on your auditor's opinion or your business evaluator's opinion, who's going to be relying on it being as independent and objective as you can, getting all the information available that you can in order to form your conclusion. So you may be looking at a certain industry. What's the opportunities and the threats within that industry in forming, that's going to form your valuation opinion. You're looking at the business itself. What's the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats in that business? You're looking at the general industry as well. What's happening in the Alberta economy? What's happening in the Canadian, the international economy? Bringing all that to bear on your opinion. And there's many sources, and sometimes some different sources might have different opinions on what they think, the outlook of a certain industry is. So it's not turning a blind eye on one piece of information to favor another piece of information. You look at it all.
Aspiring to the truth, aspiring to be honest, to do our best is fundamental to the integrity of the whole field of both science and academia. Wholeness is an interesting issue. It's I guess it refers to completeness and whether it maybe is completeness in terms of truth or completeness in terms of the story or completeness in terms of what we've done or tried to do. Those are also parts of what we do in seeking the truth. We're trying to get the whole story. We're trying to find the whole truth and nothing but the truth. In the world of science, we do a lot of sharing of work. And in fact, I'm part of what's called the open source movement in computing, but this is where we share text and computing code. We share our ideas, and in fact, without that open sharing, we don't advance. Our knowledge doesn't spread, and so sharing is fundamental to advancement of knowledge and science and truth. But then so too is appropriate attribution. And sharing the credit for ideas or work. The idea of copying, or if you want, plagiarism, is something that has through history changed in terms of both our perception of its appropriateness or its morality. In the world of art during the Renaissance time, it was considered to be quite an honor to copy the works of great painters, great sculptors. And even the sculptors themselves would bring in large studios and mentor their students to try and paint and sculpt just exactly as they did. And in those days, there wasn't much attribution. You just simply were from the studio. And it was hard to tell whether it was the master who was doing it or the pupil. I think, though, then there's this other issue of, is there appropriate attribution, and does it affect the consequence or have consequences for those that are publishing, those that are grading, those that are ultimately evaluating the work? And this is where the element of integrity comes in. is it done simply to share a concept or an idea, or is it done for professional advancement? Is there something that is perhaps nefarious or ulterior that's involved? And this is where it starts getting into that gray area.